Hello and welcome. Coming up tonight, after his by-election humiliations, can the Prime Minister cling on? I'll ask the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng. Will Trump be prosecuted for encouraging the storming of the Capitol? His National Security Advisor, John Bolton, will say. Anushka and Screeny run the numbers on how far we are from meeting climate change targets. I'll discuss whether the politics of class conflict is still relevant with the writer of The Magnificent Sherwood, James Graham, and proving that the politics of understanding trumps the politics of hate, Labour's Kim Leadbeater and Theresa May's ex-Chief of Staff, Lord Barwell. Watch out. There's midterm blues and there's Boris Johnson blues. He was in Rwanda, and not because Priti Patel expelled him there, when his party suffered the humiliation of losing two by-elections, one in the old Tory blue wall heartlands of the southwest and the other in the new Tory red wall heartlands of the north. The loss of Tiverton is the third super-safe seat the Tories have lost to the Lib Dems over just the past year. And given that Johnson's big Commons majority was built on the red wall, Labour's win in Wakefield proves that what washes blue can turn red again. But Labour's leader Starmer would be foolish to assume he's on the road to a decisive victory at the next general election. The swing to Labour was less than half the swing to the Lib Dems, and even though Johnson has some of the worst poll ratings ever recorded for a serving Prime Minister, Starmer's ratings remain lacklustre and are nothing like the kind of approval ratings Blair enjoyed when he was opposition leader. Starmer has rehabilitated Labour from its 2019 evisceration, but he and Labour are no more popular than Kinnock and Miliband were at equivalent times, and they both went on to lose elections. The lessons for the members of both parties may in fact be the same for both the Tories and Labour. If winning the next general election decisively is what it's all about, they may both have to contemplate replacing their leaders. It's a cruel game, politics, isn't it, Anushka?
Well, after that, I think we need to talk about both Boris and Keir. Let's start with the Prime Minister after those by-election defeats. Is this typical midterm blues or something more? So, look, these are his net satisfaction ratings since becoming Prime Minister. And you can see there was a bit of a bounce after the election in 2019, but he hasn't crossed the zero line since then, despite a couple of bounces, and he is now down at minus 36. So let's compare that to others with this Ipsos data. We have David Cameron in pink and Margaret Thatcher in yellow, both from when they became Prime Minister. And this red bit here is where we're at now, just under 3 years into their terms. And the truth is, they both fell pretty low. Thatcher was on minus 33, Cameron on minus 30, yet, as we know, they both recovered to win general elections in 83 and 2015. Some say the Falklands War led to that 1983 result. You can see a huge spike there for Thatcher. There has been a tiny Ukraine bounce, but already that has fallen away. And the pollster, James Johnson, does think this is different to the past because he thinks only one person was to blame for the by-election results, and that is the Prime Minister himself. He points to polling of swing voters in Wakefield who said the number one reason for voting against the Tories was the Prime Minister's response to Partygate, and the number two reason was that the Prime Minister was out of touch. Now, number three was cost of living, and there is some bad news there for the Conservatives as well, because if we compare on economic optimism at a similar point, Margaret Thatcher was low, minus 27, David Cameron, minus 30, but for Boris Johnson, all the way down at minus 57. But look, before Labour put the champagne on ice, big problems for them too. Forget the debate about whether Keir Starmer is boring or not. This question is much more important. Does he look like a Prime Minister in waiting? Only 24% say yes, 55% say no. Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. So I just want to pick up on actually what we've both been talking about. Now, obviously, the by-elections were much worse for Boris Johnson than they were for Keir Starmer. But this point, that if it's about a decisive win, does it mean both parties have to think about replacing their leaders? You've got slightly less skin in this game, I think, Gavin, than... So I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I think at the moment we're on course for a hung parliament at the next election. Neither party looks like winning. I think on the Conservative side, the Prime Minister, these were not midterm blues. The Wakefield result, if you'd taken that on its own, maybe you could say that's a typical midterm by-election. But the Tiverton one was catastrophic. It's the largest numerical majority ever overturned in a by-election. I think on the Labour side, what would worry me, there was a poll done in Wakefield where voters were asked the question, and Anushka was just talking about the satisfaction rating. And Starmer had less negatives than Johnson, but he actually had fewer people who were positive about him. So he's removed the negatives that Jeremy Corbyn...
But the enthusiasm is
right,
not.
but he's not created any kind of breakthrough at all.
And so if, it is about decisive win, not a hung parliament, should Labour be thinking about, replacing Starmer?
No, in my view.
Well, how does he turn it round?
I think what we don't give Keir enough credit for is, as you said in your introduction, Robert, how he has turned things around since 2019 after that horrendous election defeat. And we don't talk about that enough.
No, well, I did just talk about it. And
Quite right too, well done. But you're right, we need, so we're on a journey. It sounds like we're on the X Factor, but we're on a journey. And that doesn't happen overnight. We've got work to do. We know we've got work to do. But I think...
But what is that work? Tell us what that work is.
I think it's still the rebuilding of the Labour Party and creating that vision that people want to see from us. And I think we're very aware of that, and that's the work that's going on. I think, what the Wakefield by-election and the Homerton and Tiverton by-election show very clear is that people have had enough of this government. They've had enough of the Prime Minister. They're seeing him for what he is, what he always was. But
you also need a positive. It's not, it's quite hard to win an election decisively if it's all about how awful the other side.
Oh, no, I agree, absolutely.
And, I remember, look, it was sort of, millifandom and all of that. He whipped up... We haven't even got millifandom for Keir Starmer.
No, we've got work to do. There's no two ways about it. But what we've got is someone with integrity and morality and someone who is fundamentally a decent human being, and I think that's what the country needs at the moment. The three-word slogans are gone. The country needs more than that. It deserves more than that.
And if I could just ask about the other big event this week, which was Nicola Sturgeon saying, she hopes a referendum in October next year, but taking it to the Supreme Court, and if she gets blocked, the next election will be fought on this single issue of independence for Scotland. At the moment, she would regard Boris Johnson as her greatest asset to win the referendum. Will that weigh on Tory MPs' minds as they decide whether to replace Boris Johnson?
I think it'll be a factor, but not a huge one. And you're right, if you talk to the SNP privately, they think that the Prime Minister is their biggest recruiting sergeant. I wish that Conservative MPs had made a decision on the issue of principle about how the Prime Minister's behaved, but they haven't. And I think that the key factor is going to be, for them, the pragmatic test of whether there's somebody else they think will give them a better result at the next election. And I think that will be the dominant factor, but you're right, certainly for colleagues in Scotland, the sense that if they change leader, it may help them in the campaign against the SNP will be a factor.
And, when I talk to your colleagues in Scotland, they say that it is incredibly hard to challenge the SNP if there is no confidence among Scots that Labour will form the next government in Westminster, for actually very similar reasons to the ones that Gavin has just been talking about. And so, actually, given that you are also a part of the union, it doesn't look as though Starmer can turn that round either.
No, I think we can turn it around. I think it's a hard job, but I think we can do it. I'm extremely proud of the work that Anna Seward has done in Scotland as our new Labour leader up there. He's a wonderful politician. He really engages with people. He really understands where people are coming from. So we're making great inroads there. And I think now is just not the time for an independence referendum on Scotland. We need our country pulling together, not being driven apart.
But even if there isn't an independence referendum, we now know that the SNP is not going to have a manifesto. It's going to have one line, which is independence for Scotland. And that's going to be challenging for Labour as much as it is for the Tories.
But also, that's not what Scotland needs. Scotland needs the help that the rest of the people across the United Kingdom need. It needs help with the cost of living. It needs help with, NHS. It needs help with all those issues. And I think for the SNP to just go straight back to talking about independence is really not fair on the country.
Look, tons more to talk about with both of you. Right now, though, I'm going to go to an interview I recorded just a short while ago with the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng. And it won't surprise you to know that I began by asking him whether the Conservatives' humiliation in those two by-elections were mainly because voters have decisively turned against Boris Johnson, or could there be another reason?
I don't think it is. I think it's quite a severe case, if you like, of midterm blues. The by-elections were very disappointing. But I think that we can certainly recover from this, and I'm very keen to work with the Prime Minister and the government to do that.
But if he says that he can't change who he is, which he has said, how does he recover?
I think we recover by focusing on the economy, focusing, as the Chancellor has done, on helping people through the cost of living. I think we've committed something like £37 billion of support this year. I think we're listening to voters, listening to British people, and we're trying to help people get through a difficult time. And that's what the Prime Minister, the Chancellor and other members of the government are really focused on.
You're a free market, low tax Conservative. You know businesses have to invest if we're going to get a recovery, so you must be deeply uncomfortable about the extent to which business taxes are going up.
So one of the features of this period is, of course, we spent something like £400 billion in 1 year, to help the economy through COVID. Now, that money has to be paid for at some point.
So you sacrifice your free market principles?
Well, the free market has to operate in an environment where we actually have an economy, and that's what the Chancellor's intervention, particularly with furlough and other schemes, the business loans, the COVID recovery schemes, all of those schemes, we're putting money at a critical time into the economy. And I think his approach now is a balanced one, because we have to raise the revenue to cover some, not all, but some of the vast expenditure that we made.
So do you think those corporation tax rises, just to be clear, you do think those corporation tax rises are still needed?
I think the corporation tax rises will be looked at, they're being looked at, and we'll have to wait and see what the Chancellor comes up with in the subsequent budget.
So they're absolutely not guaranteed to happen then?
Well, nothing's guaranteed. I mean, I always, we always have this game with journalists where people are trying to get cabinet ministers to second guess what the budget's going to be, a year, 9 months in advance, and I'm not willing to do to play that game. I think we have to wait and see what the Chancellor says. Okay. But the rationale between raising money through corporation tax was partly because the corporates were saved to an extraordinary degree in the whole furlough process and the whole expenditure during COVID.
But in terms of your, free market convictions, OK, you've just explained that taxes have to go up to pay for the COVID support, but imposing tariffs on steel, which your own experts say aren't justified. I mean, you're a free trade Tory as well.
So I am a free
can't
trader,
be right.
but Robert, on steel, I've been very, very clear. I spoke to just the House of Commons committee yesterday on this. Steel is a strategic asset. You will know that every G7 country produces steel in their shores, in their borders. Every single one. In fact, we produce less steel than all the other G7 countries. And I'm not prepared to see the British steel industry simply disappear through so-called market forces, when you know that the lead producer of steel subsidises steel and supports their industry to the hilt. So I'm not prepared to essentially import millions of tons of steel from China and let our steel industry go to the wall. I've been very robust about that. And I think that that's something that we need to protect and cherish.
Now, it won't surprise you that we do want to talk a little bit about climate change, and Anushka's just going to set up our conversation.
That's right. Today, the UK's Climate Change Committee published its annual progress report. And I asked Lord Deben, the committee chair, how he'd rate the government's net zero plans out of 10. And he said 9 on ambition. Very, very impressive. But that number plummets to just 4 out of 10 on actual progress. The committee did point to positive action on things like electric cars, but they also highlighted areas where things weren't moving nearly fast enough, including making our homes more energy efficient. So this is installations of things like loft insulation since 2010. And you can see in the first couple of years of the coalition government, the numbers were high based on a scheme that started under the previous Labour government. But then the government scrapped it and the numbers absolutely plummeted and have stayed low since. It's why, as I've shown you before, British homes lose heat at a way quicker rate than German homes, for example. And if we had been better here, it would have actually cut the average energy bill by £40. We also asked Lord Deben about the imminent decision on a new coal mine in Cumbria. And just so you know what he said on that, he said, let's be absolutely clear, it would be indefensible. We do not need this coal mine.
Quasi, I better put that quote from your former colleague.
He was
Lord
never quite
Deben.
my former colleague. He never sat in the House when I was there.
Well,
but
he was
yes.
a Tory minister.
He was.
He was a Tory minister. I mean, he says utterly indefensible to allow this coal mine to go ahead.
Look, I think Lord Deben is doing a great job chairing the CCC. I have great respect for him. I think with respect to the coal mine, it's not a thermal coal mine. It's what's called a coking coal mine. So that means it's used in industry. And if we didn't have it here, just want to say, for interest of clarity, I don't get to decide whether it happens or not. But there is a strong argument to say that if we didn't have it here, we would simply be importing the coal from China, as we do. We have imported coal in the past from Russia and other places which that won't help the planet. The Russian coal mines, the Chinese coal mines are not net zero compliant.
But don't we need to lead by example?
Yeah, we are leading by example. I mean, I was interested in his report. I was very pleased, actually, that he gave us 9 out of 10 for ambition. I think we do have ambition.
But he also said there's no chance of actually achieving the 2050 target because you're not executing properly.
I think we are executing some things very well. There are some areas, particularly in relation to electricity power generation. We've got offshore wind. We've got ambitious targets. We've got...
No, he was clear about that. But home insulation, he says, is absolutely
I think that is a
central
challenge.
to the ambition.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I think that, and obviously you're here to say, you know, what the bad things are.
Well, no, I'm not saying,
but I agree that we have a challenge.
But Cameron
and we could do more.
shouldn't have cut Cameron shouldn't have cut the home insulation scheme, should he?
What are we doing discussing what Cameron did in 2011?
OK.
I mean, you know, let's look forward. Let's look at what we can do now in 2022.
But just to be clear, therefore, can we expect a home insulation, a more ambitious plan?
Yeah. I think, Robert, you're quite right. I'd like to see... You know, we've had a few bites of this cherry in terms of home insulation. One of the problems we have is that we've got the oldest housing stock in Western Europe. Our homes are generally, on average, older and less energy efficient than the average in many European countries. And that's mainly for historic reasons. And we've got a real challenge there. And that's why we want to look at energy efficiency schemes all the time, and we're hopeful that we can get another one up and running.
Now, I thought I'd cheer you up because I've seen episode 1 of Channel 4's new series, Undeclared War, which I think is out quite soon. And the new Prime Minister, after Boris Johnson in this series, is played by Adrian Lester. He went to Eton. And you know Adrian. So Channel 4 is saying... So there we are. Channel 4 is saying you're going to be the next Prime Minister.
Well, I'm not quite sure they are saying that. I think they're conjuring a future... an interesting future, but let's see what happens. I mean, I think the Prime Minister we have is going to serve for a very long time. Well, and I look forward very much to working with him to achieving his ambitious agenda.
I'm not sure you quite ruled out putting yourself forward when the moment
I never
comes.
rule myself in or out of anything. You know that, Robert. I'm very deliberate about that, but I'm very focused now, 100% focused on backing the Prime Minister, making sure that we deliver and that we can get re-elected under Boris Johnson's leadership at the next general election.
Kwasi, as always, very good to see you.
Thank you. Take care.
So I talked to him a bit about some of the massive economic challenges that the government is facing. There was a meeting of central bankers in Portugal today. We had the Fed, we had the European Central Bank, we had the Bank of England, and they all said the era of low interest rates is over. You know, the era of low inflation is over. I think the FT is actually splashing its copy tomorrow on this issue of high inflation is likely to persist for longer. Do you think, Gavin, that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have fully appreciated the magnitude of the economic shift that we're living through, which is going to be incredibly difficult for all of us?
I'm not sure. I expect the Chancellor's probably got a clearer grip of it because he'll be getting this advice than the Prime Minister. But look, none of the people in government at the moment, not just here in the UK, but across the world, none of the people in central banks have got any experience of dealing with inflation at this level. It's 40 years ago, the last time that we saw inflation at the levels it is at the moment. And, you know, if you look at the government's political problems that we were talking about just a second ago, that's before the country goes through this profound cost of living crisis that we have ahead of us over the next 12, 18, 24 months.
I felt funny enough, I was at the memorial for Sir Sam Britton, the great FT columnist, last night, in fact, and it did remind me that almost everybody who knew about it is either dead or quite old. Kim, the other interesting thing about Kwasi, and he very much is on the sort of libertarian free market wing. He said so-called market forces, and broadly, he was talking about intervening before breakfast, lunch, and tea. He hasn't left a lot of space for a left-of-centre party, has he?
Well, I mean, the reality is now we've got a high-tax, low-growth government. We've got a high-tax, low-growth economy. And sadly, the impact of that and the impact of 12 years of this Conservative government is that people are really, really struggling. And that's what is on...
Where's the Labour growth plan?
Well, this is what Rachel Reeves is putting up. I mean, she's putting it together ready for it in time for the next general election. But listen, there's things that they could have done far earlier to help. They could have done the windfall tax far sooner. We were calling on that for months.
But the windfall tax doesn't generate growth.
No. But there's steps that could have been taken to improve things in people's pockets to address the cost of living crisis, and they just haven't done enough. And OK, there are short-term, obviously huge issues around Ukraine and around the pandemic, but the Conservatives have been in power for 12 years. So we need a long-term economic plan, and that's what Labour are putting together.
I don't think Gavin would disagree we need a long-term economic plan. But listen, I've got so much more I need to talk about with both of you. But now we're going to turn to a conversation I had with Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor, John Bolton. I mentioned to him that the UK's top military officer, Sir Patrick Sanders, Chief of the General Staff, yesterday said that he feared Russia would be more dangerous after the Ukraine conflict is over. Not less dangerous. Did John Bolton agree?
Well, I think the lesson we've learned so far is that unprovoked aggression can work. People have celebrated the fact that Russia had enormous difficulties at the outset of their invasion. They've certainly endured excruciating casualty levels. But on the other hand, they're fighting this war in Ukraine. It's Ukraine that's being ground into the dust. The Russians are picking up territory. And it doesn't appear at this point like we're anywhere near a conclusion. And in the Russian cost-benefit analysis, that puts them ahead, at least when it comes to non-NATO countries. So I think the lesson for NATO is to be sure that no Russians ever cross a NATO border. It's entirely sensible to prepare against that contingency.
And therefore, just to be clear on this, our Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said today that he was clear that Russia isn't winning. Not everyone agrees with him. What do you think?
Well, Russia is winning if you define winning as gaining more ground than you're losing and achieving your objectives. They may be losing in the court of public opinion worldwide, but I think we will find out the court of public opinion consists of Europe and the United States, and they've got audiences elsewhere. If this is losing, I'd hate to see what winning for the Russians would be.
Which is a fairly chilling analysis there. And so I suppose that brings us on, I think, to something that's weighing on many people's minds. There's obviously quite a big economic cost to the West of this war, with all the sanctions, impact on gas prices, food prices and the rest. How great is the risk of fatigue among voters that'll put pressure on governments to scale back the pressure on Russia?
Well, I think the pressure to do that is high. I think the Russians are counting on that. In fact, you can see the evidence in Germany and France already. And if I may just disagree with you slightly, I don't think the cost of this to Europe and the United States is that high. That's what's so disturbing about it. You know, people have not faced significant economic consequences. It's a mistake to put the burden of rising prices on this war in Ukraine. It's because of poor monetary policy across the industrialized democracies for several years now. And that's really what the economic strain is. But it is very worrying to me, not just with respect to Russia and Ukraine, but with respect to China, that China is learning the lesson that if we can't put economic pressure on Russia, an economy that's really not that connected to Europe or the United States, compared to the connections we have with China, that leaves China in a much stronger position. If you don't want to wage real warfare, and I understand why in the case of Ukraine, if you simply want to wage economic warfare, you have to be prepared to bear costs in order to be effective. And at this point, the West's performance is disappointing.
As we speak, NATO is now massively ramping up its preparedness, the resources devoted to defence. Is it doing enough?
Well, I don't know whether we're massively ramping up the resources or massively ramping up the rhetoric. You know, there's a lot of rhetoric, particularly in the United States, about all the weapons and ammunition we're delivering to Ukraine. How much of it is actually reaching the front lines is open to question. And we're in a race now with the Russians to see how much territory they can take before the full weight of this U.S. and other NATO assistance, particularly from the UK, can make itself felt. So I think you have to look at conditions on the battlefield, not the rhetoric of Western politicians. And there, as I say again, they're not fighting this war in Russia. They're fighting it on the territory of Ukraine. And when it's over, and I don't know when that will be, a considerable part of Ukraine is going to look like continental Europe in 1945.
So don't go away, because I've got much more from John Bolton after the break. You're definitely going to want to hear what he has to say about his former boss, Donald Trump, and tons to discuss with Gavin, Kim, and the brilliant writer of Sherwood, James Graham. See you in a minute.
I need a Nero! Now get 25% off coffee and pastries 7 days a week with Compare the Market.
EE is the UK's most reliable network, and guys, we have fewer dropouts than anyone else. When it counts, count on EE, the UK's best network.
Frank hasn't just nailed the romantic meal. He's only gone and cinched it, just like he cinched his motor. Buying a car, don't just nail it, cinch it.
An alternative to tablets, Voltarol Back and Muscle Pain Relief Gel, with its powerful anti-inflammatory active ingredient, targets the source of pain, helping to accelerate recovery. It's not just movement, it's enjoying the new bedroom. Voltarol, the joy of movement.
Some say the captain eats the cold for breakfast because freshness is everything. It's locked in from sea to plate. And as the captain says, if you like your fish fillets with a light and crispy coating, then try my delicious new seeded crust. Get on board.
Why are we still reaching for period pads to deal with wee? Tena discreet pads might look the same, but they're designed to work differently. They protect against leaks, odour and moisture, so you can stay dry for up to 12 hours.
Keeps you dry, protects like Tena.
At Booking.com, we're just here to help you make the best of your holiday. Because now, we also do flights. And cars. Accommodations, flights, and rental cars. I mean, it's cool. Not cool, but cool, if you know what I mean. Booking.com. Booking.yeah.
When I actually seen that first order come in, I'm going to sound like a little girl. I actually screamed. Got me order. That feeling just never went. It's people believing in you, isn't it?
Sage members like Laura keep that first order feeling with our helpful business tools and advice from real experts. Sage, helping business flow.
Oh yes, it's that time again. ITV Win are back with a bang, giving you the chance to win a life-changing £300,000 tax-free. Just last year, we were able to give away millions of pounds worth of prizes, from a brand new car to a luxury holiday. It's your time to shine. And with a £300,000 win, you'll definitely have something to smile about. So what are you waiting for? There's £300,000 up for grabs with your name on it. To be in with a chance of winning, just search ITV Win today.
In the UK, 1.4 million households use 100% renewable electricity from Shell.
Shell experts are working on a wind project that could power 6 million homes. These chargers are popping up on our streets.
Shell aims to fit 50,000 nationwide by 2025.
And with more electric car charge points coming to Shell forecourts near you, the UK is ready for cleaner energy.
Think you can ride in the Tour de France? Can you ride a bike for 3,300 kilometers? Can you hit speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour? Magnifique, winner of the ultimate cycling race can. Tour de France 2022. Starts Friday at 2:45 on ITV4 and ITV Hub.
Welcome back. Now let's return to my interview with Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor, John Bolton. Now, I wanted to talk to him about the extraordinary hearings taking place in Washington on the storming of the Capitol on the 6th of January. And I wondered if he had become convinced that Donald Trump had deliberately enabled the attempted insurrection.
Well, I believe that he hoped that something, some deus ex machina would come along to prevent the counting of the electoral votes. I don't necessarily buy that this was some massive conspiracy, because I think that gives Trump too much credit for intelligence that he doesn't have. It was a terrible day for America. It was a terrible day. And what Trump did really will live as a stain on our history. But I think it's very important for possible reforms or corrections not to overstate the risk and the damage. It was bad, but Trump is an aberration in American history. He's not the wave of the future. And I think for all the sensationalism that has been made of some of these hearings, people are going to overshoot the mark and undercut their credibility. What happened, just on a purely factual basis, was bad enough. You don't need to hype it.
And so just to be clear, there are some in America who are saying Trump should now be prosecuted. I think you're saying you don't agree with that.
Well, number one, I am very worried about the decades-long trend in the United States toward the criminalization of politics. Every time somebody does something wrong, people talk about impeachment or prosecution. But people also, those who want Trump prosecuted, have to remember a criminal trial is not a good show on TV. It means proving every element of every charge against the defendant beyond a reasonable doubt. And they should weigh how difficult that is and weigh the possible consequences after an indictment and trial of a big newspaper headline that says Trump acquitted. But that is more dangerous than the situation we're in now.
And just actually, because we're almost out of time, to close on this point, I think the last time we chatted, you thought that Trump would not be a candidate in the next election. But after everything you've heard, do you think that he should be prevented from being a candidate?
I think the people will prevent him from being a candidate. I don't think he will see a path even to the Republican nomination. The revelations of the hearings of the January 6th committee have been quite devastating. It may not be visible, but even among Trump supporters, he's increasingly in the rearview mirror. And the ultimate best test of a representative government is for the people to make that decision and not the high-minded and not the prosecutors.
John Bolton, as ever, really good to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
So tons to discuss there. I just want to sort of pick up with this pessimism we heard from John Bolton. I mentioned, actually, in talking to him, that the Chief of the General Staff, Sir Patrick Sanders, yesterday said that he thought Russia would emerge more dangerous after the Ukraine conflict. And he said it felt to him like we were back in 1937, essentially saying, you know, Putin's the equivalent of Hitler. But we've also got the Defence Secretary, you know, basically saying we're winning. There's this great split at the top, isn't there, over this?
There is, and I probably find myself somewhere in the middle. I think Putin isn't winning, but he isn't losing either. And the Ukrainians are paying a very heavy price to try and maintain their independence. And I think we, as the Prime Minister was saying, I actually think the Prime Minister's done well on Ukraine. We need to stick in this for the long haul, and we need to do a much better job, as John was intimating, of getting the military aid to the front line as quickly as possible, because at the moment, they're fighting with a huge disadvantage in artillery.
Can I ask you, Kim, when you're out campaigning, whether it's in the local by-elections or in your own constituency, do you hear concerns from voters that actually they don't feel this is their war and that the price is too high?
No, actually, quite the opposite. I think people feel really passionately about this. I think there is the worry about fatigue because it has been going on for what seems like such a long time now, and we have to be aware of that, and that's why it's so important that the media keeps talking about it. But I think people feel that this is about international global security, and that's why, you know, we've got to fully get behind NATO, as the Labour Party always has done, and we've got to make sure that we keep this on the agenda, because no, I think people feel really deeply about this, and despite other issues in their own lives around the cost of living and other things, they know how important this is.
Great. I'm going to come back to both of you in a minute, though, Anushka, I think you're going to move us on a bit.
Yeah, well, it's this global context, which is why the Defence Secretary wants more money for defence. And the figures tell quite a story. If we look at 2010 to 2025, according to the Resolution Foundation, defence will see a 6% cut in real terms. Now, if we put that in context of other departments, you can see it's here. There are other departments that are hit even worse than that. But with what's happening in Ukraine, Ben Wallace would argue that it needs to be higher than that. So let's look at defence spending over a longer time period, back from 1948 all the way up to today. This is the combination of defence, education and health spending as a proportion of GDP. It stays similarly high across all of this, but you can see back after the war there was way more of this being spent on defence, and that has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and it's much, much smaller now. The peace dividend, perhaps, that the Secretary of State has referred to, but we also got that huge rise in the welfare state. Up went spending on education and health, hugely increasing in the noughties. Now, some would say we don't have that peace dividend anymore, so this needs to increase. But the question is, given that we don't have a limitless supply of money, do we cut health and education to pay for it, or do we raise taxes? For this data, Christian Shah is our Geek of the Week. Robert.
All right. I mean, Gavin, we've had the spectacle the last couple of days of Ben Wallace lobbying very hard for more money. He now claims he wasn't talking about more money now, but for 24-25. But it is a fact, and I talked to the IFS about this only today, that real inflation-adjusted spending on defence is falling over the next few years, and we're only going to be just above that 2% threshold, which is so important to NATO, come the next election. But, you know, schools need more money, hospitals need more money. These choices are incredibly difficult for the government, for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, and this is why the Conservatives want to cut taxes. They're going to find it very difficult to do so if they can't increase the growth rate of the economy. I think we are going to have to spend some more on defence in order to meet the NATO commitments. I don't really like debates that are just about the quantum of spending. I think the question is, what do we spend it on? Where is the need to modernise our forces and provide a stronger deterrent? I suspect one of the things we're going to be asked to do at this NATO summit is increase the footprint in Estonia, where there's British forces there helping to provide this kind of trigger defence at the moment, and it sounds like NATO wants to strengthen the size of that deployment.
I mean, the last election, your party was accused of a magic money tree. We've seen a magic money tree, actually, over the last couple of years, to use that awful cliche, with massive, unprecedented spending during COVID by the current government. When it comes to any credible party, it is about difficult choices, isn't it, Ken?
It's absolutely about difficult choices for any government, as you quite rightly say. But ultimately, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has changed things in that now defence, I think, has to be a priority. NATO is more important than ever. We're very clear about that. So we have to look at spending. And one thing we would do when we get into power, when we get into government, is we would do a review of spending on defence, and John Healey is leading the work on that for us brilliantly. But you're right, difficult decisions, health, education, defence and everything else that goes into the mix.
And borrowing surging at the moment, and that being that borrowing problem being magnified by the fact that you know, the interest rate the government is paying, because it frankly managed its borrowing rather badly, soaring as well.
Well, and I think Gavin's point about efficiency is really important as well. It's not just how much you spend, it's how efficient you are. You know, I don't like looking backwards. I prefer looking forwards. But, you know, the 11.8 billion that was signed off in COVID, you know, where did that go? That would have been really useful in lots of ways. So we've got to look at efficiency as well.
The big question is how we grow our economy quicker. The problem we've got is the cake is small. So the share you need.
And we talked about that a bit earlier, and we'll doubtless come back to it again. Anushka.
Our next guest is writer James Graham, who's responsible for hit drama Sherwood, about murders, about trust in the police and about what miners' strikes in the 80s in the Midlands meant for communities. It comes at a time when we are, of course, seeing strikes again, postal workers voting tonight and rail strikes already underway, but two people support them. I thought this was interesting from Opinion. They ran polling over the week of rail strikes, and to start with, opposition was ahead. But interestingly, as the week progressed, support for strikers rose, and by the end, it was ahead. Support 45%, opposition 37%.
Completely fascinating. That we'll probably pick up on that in a minute. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the writer James Graham. Another hit on your hands with Sherwood. Congratulations. Have you ever had a flop, by the way? Actually, don't answer that question. Let's get on to what I really wanted to talk to you about. I mean, you actually talked about Sherwood in The Guardian in a piece you wrote today, and you said the reason you wrote it was to explore how the forces of polarisation have been weaponised, these are your words, to achieve political ends. Tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah, well, I think I was really pleased and excited to try and take a traditional format like the crime drama, but not really spend any of my energies or my passion telling the murder mystery thriller of that. It was all about the politics, and the politics coming from a community where I grew up in North Nottinghamshire. And I suppose exploring the way in which historically, as we know, there is sometimes a trend for certain political parties or governments to gain short-term political capital by dividing people rather than doing the really hard thing, which is uniting them. And I suppose I feel a really visceral upset and resentment at often the casual and reckless way language is used by some of our politicians and by some of the press. And if I'm really honest, even often some of the glee or the relish that is used to divide people into these camps, whether it's the working class north versus the metropolitan elites or Remainers and Leavers. And coming from somewhere like the community represented in Sherwood, where 40 years on still from the divisions of that miners' strike, the human pain that's
and it is still true that within the community, there is still resentment about who was in the NUM and who was in the other union, the UDM, and who worked through the strike and who didn't. Those memories are still alive.
Of course, and you know, obviously it can dissipate with time and as a generation gets older. But no, it's really true. Nottinghamshire was, as you know, very unique in that, unlike the greater solidarity in Yorkshire or other places, 3/4 of miners went back to work in Nottinghamshire. Hence why it was the crucible for a lot of this violence. And no, I mean, I spent a lot of time, obviously, in my home talking to people and researching this. And the friends that broke up with friends and haven't spoken for 30, 40 years couldn't even go to the funeral of somebody they maybe once loved. There's that side of the pub and there's that side of the pub. It's so shockingly painful still. And obviously I'm very biased, but I think the power of drama and storytelling in this place where politics is being irresponsible and toxic, drama and storytelling can tell a more unifying and more empathetic version of the story.
James, I want to talk to you more about where we see those divisions now, and indeed, because you think we've really got to do our best to avoid it, so we'll explore that too. So don't go away, lots more to discuss with the brilliant James Graham, Kim and Gavin, also brilliant, after the break.
Pampers Punami Brief Pants. Their revolutionary new Stop and Protect pocket helps stop major messes escaping. So you'll never fear a punami again. Pampers, together we make baby's world better.
Gary, I see you've got yourself a smart meter. That's, well, smart.
Oh, thanks, Einstein.
So you'll know how it helps you manage your household budgets, showing how much energy you're using daily, weekly and monthly, and how much it's costing you, which could help you make changes to save. It all counts.
Search Get a Smart Meter today.
For effective constipation relief, take Dulcolax. It works only where your body needs it, stimulating your natural bowel movement. Dulcolax. Feel good inside and out. And try Dulcoese, a constipation relief gentle enough for long-term use.
So Booking.com offers amazing accommodations, but does that make us flashy or cool? Probably not. Sorry, no pictures. Making a commercial. We're just here to help you make the best of your holiday. Because now, whew, we also do flights and cars, accommodations, flights, and rental cars. Probably not this one. I mean, it's cool, not cool, but cool, if you know what I mean. Booking.com, yeah.
Sky's award-winning lineup is here. That's award-winning fibre broadband and award-winning Sky TV for a great value, £39 a month. Plus, we'll give you Netflix at no extra cost. Get award-winning service and super fast speeds with our fibre broadband. Watch all the shows you love on award-winning Sky TV and choose from the latest on Netflix, like the new season of Stranger Things. All in Sky's award-winning lineup. Wow, now that's winning value. Go to sky.com.
Running a business can feel like climbing a mountain. It's actually a volcano. Zero accounting software can help keep your business finances running smoothly. Soon, climbing up that mountain will feel more like riding down one on a really cool bike that can time travel. Search Zero with an X, because healthy business is beautiful business.
New Lynx Epic Fresh Body Spray.
No, you like the finer things. Every night stepping designer skins. All you need is a diamond ring. But if you don't reply, I can't buy you things. Board the plane, we fly Havana. Cut the chase, let's find the matter. You say you don't like the camera. Love the way you like Rihanna.
Anything is possible with an irresistibly fresh fragrance. Smell iconic. The Lynx Effect.
Gala Bingo's real fun to play, but you also need chill in your day. Play Gala with your friends, but watch your spends. Boss your bingo and relax in the hay. Balance your play with your day at Gala Bingo.
How do you define British cinema? Its landscape, language, character, quite distinct character.
That reflect who we are for generations to come.
These are the homegrown stories that became global hits. Welcome to Real Britannia, streaming now only on BritBox.
Welcome back. I'm delighted James Graham is still with me. Sherwood is set in Ashfield, which is where you grew up. It's now a Tory seat. What's the connection, if there is one, between what happened in the miners' strike and where we are now?
Oh, gosh, good question. Well, I think I don't want to be too simplistic, because what I hope that the drama does show is that often we paint these red wall communities as being sort of a homogenous block of uniformity, and they're as complex and inconsistent as other places. But I do think, and Kim, I don't know if you disagree with this actually, but whether I do think there was a traditional connection to the labour movement that often did come through the trade unions and through work. And because work has changed, and because obviously trade unions have often disappeared entirely from the private sector, in communities like this, where there can be sort of more socially conservative and more traditional values, I think there is a push-pull between the left and the right. And it's going to be really fluid, as we've seen in Wakefield. So these places are going to become even more significant bellwethers for, I think, the way that the country's going.
And to what, I mean, there are some members of this government who think that the way to, in a sense, solidify their hold on some of these former Labour seats is to push some of these socially conservative issues. The one that most people often refer to as the trans issue, for example. To what extent, just knowing in your own sort of hometown, as it were, are they sort of onto something, and to what extent does it also worry you?
Oh, it really worries me, to my previous point. And I'm not completely convinced that the culture wars are being fought on the streets of Ashfield. I think they're being fought on comment threads and on shock jock radio programmes, and most people are just trying to crack on with their lives. So yeah, I'm less convinced about that. And obviously, levelling up as a government strategy, how can you be against that? And I'm hugely for that. Regional disparity in the UK is a real thing. It is measurable. In the East Midlands, where Sherwood is set, I think at the last measure, we had the lowest fewest amount spent of public spending on each individual person than any region in the county. So something just has to aggressively change. I, again, very biased, I would love to see greater emphasis on culture and place. I know we talk a lot about investment and training and infrastructure, which is obviously really key. The thing that's really been reawakened in me doing Sherwood is the value still that people place on physical community and the collective. And because the public realm has been so aggressively dismantled in the past few years, whether that's pubs or libraries or leisure centres or anywhere to literally physically congregate, that missed sense of what a community actually is, I think, is being really felt. And if the government wanted to improve people's happiness and well-being, that would be really high up on the levelling up agenda.
Kim, I think you wanted to...
I'm just nodding away. I mean, every single thing that he said is absolutely spot on as far as I'm concerned. I'm a little bit in awe, if I'm honest, James. It's absolutely fantastic to be able to share a platform with you tonight. Yeah, this sense of community. Look, people know my story. My sister was murdered during one of the most divisive times that our country has seen. And I was trying to avoid dropping the Brexit word, but inevitably Brexit created so many divisions that we'd never seen before. And I'm not bothered what you voted for in Brexit, but the damage it did to our country in terms of the divisions...
Are any of those divisions being healed? Because you talked about, again, in your Guardian piece, that you felt the Brexit divisions were as bad as the miners, the divisions from the miners' strike. So do you see a sense, Kim, of any of those Brexit divisions being healed?
I think they are, but only because people want to just move on from it. I don't think the government is helping heal those divisions, and sadly, what we're seeing is divisive politics. We talked about Trump. We've got the same thing going on here to some degree with politicians who are using really important issues like pay for workers to divide communities, and that's just not helpful. We need politicians who want to bring communities together and find solutions to people's problems.
You must worry, Gavin, about the extent to which, when the government gets into a tight hole, it tries to exacerbate these Brexit splits again.
Not just Brexit. I mean, there are people in Number 10 that are constantly trying to identify what they call wedge issues and to divide people, the exact opposite of what you said. I think there's something fundamental going on in politics, not just in this country, across much of the democratic world, where politics used to, when I was growing up, it was basically about economics. And it's increasingly become about culture and identity. And those issues are much harder, because if we disagree about how much the state should spend, we can probably live with a compromise. But if you're arguing about abortion or Brexit or Scottish independence, it's very hard to find positions that everyone can live with.
Mm. And so this move, I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, the early 80s were, in a sense about class war, the miners' strike. Mm-hmm. But, on Gavin's point, in some ways, class war actually is an easier basis for compromise because it's broadly about distribution and money. Whereas where we are now, identity is a much more complicated issue.
I think that's definitely true, but I'm not really sure. I think those wedge issues, whether it's I have to say, the current member for Ashfield is getting some renown of late, and that's Lee Anderson.
Mm. And how does do the people of Ashfield, when he says Prime Minister didn't do anything wrong with those parties, does the people of Ashfield think that's right?
No, they don't. Like everywhere else in the country, that really cut through, and there was great anger and great pain at the unfairness of that. I think probably to an extent, when I'm around there, I do hear a frustration with the story not moving on, because actually it's a bad story. If I was writing it, I would have concluded it by now and made sure there was a satisfying ending. So I do think people are frustrated with it being prolonged. But no, I mean, if you ask me, do people in Ashfield care about what the Prime Minister did and law breaking in Downing Street? They absolutely do.
And can I just ask, just very briefly, Gavin, you were saying that levelling up, you support it?
Yep.
And there's no question, pretty much everybody in the country has heard of it. Actually, there's so much else going on. I mean, quite a lot of members of your party think levelling up is just not going to happen, and that would be quite serious, wouldn't it?
It would. I mean, I think it's one of the best things about the Prime Minister, that he's brought a focus on this issue, which is a very long-standing problem in our country. I think the question is whether the resourcing is adequate. If you think about what the German state spent on East Germany to raise economic performance up there, what we're spending at the moment is nowhere near that.
Not in the
so, right idea, but needs even greater attention.
Now, listen, I want to say thanks to you, James, Kim, Gavin. Lovely to see you all. Thanks for joining us. That's it. Tomorrow night, Boris Johnson is due to return home after 8 days abroad to the warring family that is his Conservative Party. In his absence, has anybody been plotting to change the locks at Number 10? Join me next week to find out. Bye.